Welcome back. The story continues in Batch B of the CEO who fired her for stealing, then found out who she really was. Min-ho called her 14 times before noon. Each call rang out into silence, and by the 15th, something cold and unfamiliar settled into his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a boy watching his father's casket lowered into frozen ground. Fear. Real fear, the kind that didn't respond to money or power or the weight of his own name. He arrived at her apartment building at 12:47 p.m., taking the stairs two at a time instead of waiting for the elevator, and knocked until his knuckles ached. When she finally opened the door, still in yesterday's clothes, eyes red-rimmed and exhausted, relief crashed through him so hard he nearly forgot to be angry. "You left," he said. "I had to." "Why?" Dera crossed her arms, putting distance between them even in the narrow doorway. "Because I know how this ends, Min-ho. I've seen it happen to women who look like me in rooms like yours. The novelty fades, the board keeps whispering, and one day you wake up and realize loving me costs more than it's worth. That's not. It's what happens," she said, voice cracking. "It's what always happens. I can't lose everything I've built here because I let myself fall for a man I can't actually keep." Min-ho stepped closer, refusing to let the door become a wall between them. "Then let me prove you wrong, not with words. With time. I'm not going anywhere, Dera, and I need you to believe that even when I haven't earned it yet." Later that night, across the city, in a private lounge that smelled of imported whiskey and old grudges, Deputy Director Han sat across from a man named Choi D-sung, a name whispered carefully in Seoul's underworld, a man who controlled shipping routes and silence in equal measure. Han had lost his job, his reputation, his freedom hanging by a legal thread, and desperate men made dangerous deals. "Kang Min-ho humiliated me," Han said, swirling his drink, eyes hollow with resentment. "He'll pay for it, and I know exactly how to make it hurt." "The girl," D-sung said, already understanding. "Girl," Han confirmed. "Take her. Kang will burn his entire empire down to get her back. And while he's distracted, I take what's mine from the company records before the trial. Everyone wins." Disung smiled, slow and cruel, already calculating his own price for the favor. "Everyone except her." A few days later, unaware of the storm gathering around her, Dara returned to work, choosing, against every instinct screaming caution, to let herself feel something real with Min-ho. He showed up outside compliance at lunch with containers of jollof rice from a restaurant he'd apparently had his driver hunt down across 3 different neighborhoods, refusing to accept substitutes. "You didn't have to do this," she said, the words becoming something of a refrain between them. "I know," Min-ho said. "I wanted to see you smile like that again." They ate together in a small conference room, laughing over nothing. And for the first time since the boardroom disaster, Dara let herself believe, just slightly, that maybe this could work. Maybe the walls she'd built weren't strong enough to survive him, and maybe that wasn't the tragedy she'd always assumed it would be. She didn't notice the black car idling across the street when she left the building that evening. She didn't notice the 2 men who fell into step behind her as she walked toward the subway station, the rain-soaked streets swallowing the sound of their approach. The call came at 9:12 p.m. Min-ho was reviewing quarterly reports in his penthouse when his phone rang from an unknown number, and a voice he didn't recognize spoke words that stopped his heart cold. "We have your girl, Mr. Kang. If you want her back untouched, you'll listen very carefully." World tilted. Min-ho was on his feet before the man finished speaking, security already being summoned through the emergency line on his second phone, his mind splitting into 2 separate currents, one screaming in raw animal panic, the other cold and calculating, already assembling every resource he owned into a single, focused weapon. "If you hurt her," Min-ho said, his voice dropping into something his enemies would have recognized from his father's darkest years, "I will spend every one I have making sure you regret being born." "Where is she?" "Patience," the voice said, and the line went dead. Min-ho stood in the silence of his penthouse, breathing hard, and for the first time in his adult life, felt the true, terrifying weight of loving someone more than he loved his own control. Dara woke in an unfamiliar room, wrists bound loosely to a chair, her head throbbing from whatever they'd used to subdue her outside the subway station. The room was dim, industrial, somewhere near the docks, judging by the distant sound of foghorns cutting through the night. A man entered, tall, cold-eyed, introducing himself as nobody in particular, and Dara understood immediately she was a bargaining chip in a game she'd never asked to play. She thought of her mother in Lagos, of everything she'd survived to build a life in this country, and refused to let the fear in her chest show on her face. Kang Min-ho doesn't negotiate, she said, forcing steel into her voice she didn't entirely feel. You picked the wrong woman to use against him. We'll see, the man said, and left her alone with the foghorns and the dark. Hours passed. Dara worked quietly at the ropes around her wrists, years of stubbornness refusing to let panic win, refusing to become the kind of woman who simply waited to be saved. By midnight, Min-ho had assembled a small army. Sang-hoon had traced the ransom call to a shipping container facility owned, through 3 shell companies, by Choi D-sung, a name that made even Min-ho's most seasoned security personnel go quiet with recognition. D-sung doesn't make mistakes, Sang-hoon warned. If we go in wrong, we could lose her. We're not losing her, Min-ho said, checking the weapon Sang-hoon had reluctantly provided, his hands steady despite the storm raging behind his eyes. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what I have to burn down. Every contract, every alliance, every piece of this company, I will trade all of it for her safety without a single second of hesitation. They moved through the rain-soaked docks in near silence, Min-ho at the front despite every protest from his security team, driven by something far more powerful than strategy. Love, raw and unpolished and completely unwilling to accept any outcome that didn't end with Dara safe in his arms. Inside the facility, Dara had finally worked one wrist free when the door burst open, not with the man who'd questioned her earlier, but with chaos, shouting, the distant sound of a struggle breaking out somewhere beyond the room. Her heart hammered as she pressed herself against the wall. Unsure whether to hope or fear what was coming through that door, it was Min-ho, soaked from the rain, jaw set, eyes scanning the room with a desperation that broke something open in her chest the moment they landed on her face. He crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her chair, hands shaking as he worked the remaining rope free. I'm here, he said, voice cracking in a way she'd never heard from him. I'm here, I've got you, you're safe. Ho, I should have told Sang-hoon to put a security detail on you the moment Han's meeting happened. I should have protected you before this ever happened. I'm sorry, Dara, I'm so sorry. You came, she whispered, tears finally breaking free not from fear but from something far more overwhelming. You actually came. Always, Min-ho said, pulling her into his chest, holding her like he might never let go again. I will always come for you. Do you understand that now? Sighed the room. Sang-hoon's team had subdued D-sung's men, and within the hour, police arrived to take Han and D-sung into custody. The entire scheme unraveling under the weight of evidence Min-ho's legal team had been quietly assembling since the moment the ransom call ended. The following morning, after Dara had been checked by private doctors and cleared of any lasting harm beyond exhaustion and bruised wrists, she found Min-ho sitting outside her hospital room, still in yesterday's rain-soaked suit, refusing to leave even for a change of clothes. You look terrible, she said softly from the doorway. You look alive, Min-ho said, standing immediately, crossing to her like she was the only fixed point in a world that had nearly spun out of his control completely. That's the only thing that matters to me right now. I was scared, Dara admitted, not just of them, of losing this, of losing you before I even let myself really have you. You have me, Min-ho said, taking her hands carefully, mindful of the bandages at her wrists. Completely, publicly. I don't care what the board thinks anymore, Dara. I don't care what anyone whispers in any hallway in this city. I love you. I think I've loved you since the moment you told me I was wrong in that glass office and didn't flinch when I tried to intimidate you into silence. Dara felt the words settle into her chest like something finally coming home. I love you too, she said. God help me, I do. By the end of the month, the scandal had transformed entirely. Han and D-sung faced serious charges. their schemes exposed publicly in a way that left Kang Innovation's reputation not damaged but strengthened. A company whose CEO had personally risked everything to protect an employee from corruption and violence. The board that had once whispered now offered nothing but careful, respectful silence whenever Dera walked through the halls, because everyone understood, finally, exactly who she was to him. Min-ho took her to dinner at the same restaurant where their story had properly begun, and this time, when he reached across the table, it wasn't with an apology folder or careful business language. It was with a small velvet box that made the entire restaurant go quiet with anticipation. I built an empire because I thought power was the only thing that could protect me from ever being hurt again, Min-ho said, kneeling beside her chair despite every instinct in his controlled nature screaming against public vulnerability. But you taught me that the only thing worth protecting is you. Dera Nwosu, will you marry me? Dera, laughing and crying in equal measure, the entire restaurant holding its breath around them, said the only word that had ever felt this certain in her whole complicated, hard-won life. Yes. 1 year later, Seoul's autumn light spilled gold across the windows of a penthouse that finally felt like a home instead of a fortress. Dara stood at the window in a soft cream sweater, one hand resting against the gentle curve of her stomach, watching the city that had once felt like exile now feel, completely and irreversibly, like where she belonged. Min-ho came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his hand over hers against their unborn child, the coldest CEO in Seoul reduced entirely, happily, to a man who had learned that love wasn't a weakness to guard against but the only thing worth building an empire around. Do you ever think about that night in the glass office? Dara asked softly. The day you fired me for something I didn't do. Every day, Min-ho admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. It was the worst mistake I ever made, and somehow the reason I found everything that actually matters. Outside, the city glittered on, indifferent to the small miracle unfolding 42 floors above its streets, two people who had survived danger, doubt, and their own fear to choose each other completely for the rest of their lives. Welcome to Story World, besties. Thank you for staying until the end. Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one.